I get the icon in cornflower blue?
Hey everybody, welcome to episode 26 of Can I Get That Software in Blue? I'm one of your hosts, Chad Tyndall. Along with me is my co-host, a brilliant leader of sales who never fails to seal the deal. He's also a burgeoning day spa czar who loves to drive a fast car. Steve Mazak, everybody.
Thank you, Chad. Good morning.
I don't know if people know that you're investing in a chain of day spas. You want to talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, just very quickly. I invested in a day spa with one of my neighbors because I'm trying to learn how to run a physical business because I thought it would be fun.
It's very different from software, I'm assuming.
Very different, but also very similar. Like all the concepts I learned in e-commerce apply. So like, managing the inventory, booking services, all that stuff. So I'm doing the website just on Squarespace to help out, but mostly I'm a silent partner. Like women that go to med spas don't want to see a dude hanging out at the front desk. So
you got to make your wife the face of the business.
She's the face. I'm the behind the scenes guy. So
that's
awesome. But it's fun. I'm learning a lot.
Yeah.
I know I'm not planning on getting Botox anytime soon.
No, not at least for a month or two. All right. Well, our guest today is the successful founder of Opbeat, an open source APM tool that did some pretty innovative work and got acquired by Elastic in 2017. In 2020, he launched a new company called Bucket. And if we asked Exhibit to write an intro for our guest, he would probably say something like, "Yo, dog, I heard you like products, so I made a product to help you make product." Rasmus Makwarth, welcome to the show.
Thank you. That was a great intro.
Welcome, Rasmus. Hey, what is that keyboard behind you? I didn't know you played.
Well, kid stuff
okay.
is my level right now. Yeah. I'm trying to get better.
Yeah.
I even got a subscription, an annual subscription. That was my motivation on an app.
Oh,
for,
really?
Daily practice.
Yeah.
So I was that committed that I signed for a whole year. But yeah, we just had a baby recently, so it's I'm failing a little bit.
Yeah, I hear you. Well, congrats on the new edition, and I hope your piano skills can find a way to pick up. Chad's a musician. I'm a musician, so we're all somewhere into the music.
I love it. It's funny.
Yeah.
But even as a rookie, just sitting there 10 minutes, it's horrible what I'm playing, but you get into the zone. It feels really good. It's helping me just unwind after a stressful day. It's really good.
Yeah. So Rasmus, let's start a little bit just with your background. Like initially, how did you get into the tech industry? Like what drew you in?
Well, I'm not really a techie in sort of the classic way. I took a UX bachelor. So in terms of degree, I really came from the more, it was called human computer interaction. What is what it was called back then. It's a long time ago. So it was much more about UX and how humans can use computers. I found computers to be really frustrating actually back in the day. Like without good UX before the Apple and Mac days, I thought they were kind of annoying to work with. I love, playing around in BASIC or doing stuff on computers. And when it worked, it was just fantastic, right? But so often it was just frustrating. So UX was my thing initially. Yeah, we can talk about it. That's how I got into Opbeat and other ventures as well. But it always came from a UX point of view.
That's fascinating. That explains a lot actually about like why Opbeat worked the way it did potentially, right? Like when I first encountered it, it was a breath of fresh air, honestly.
Of course, we really tried to make it very easy to use. Back then, AppDynamics and New Relic were the sort of incumbents, and they've been around for a long time. And they're really good products and companies, right? But they're also just very sophisticated and hard to use for the next gen of developers. And we're getting into this DevOps motion where developers should take care of their code post-deployment, but they didn't know how to. And these systems were pretty complex to just dive into for a new developer. But besides sort of a cleaner UX, we also tried to integrate with Git. And GitHub was just, launching around that time, 2007, 2008. And we got into Opbeat around 2011. Integrating with Git was interesting because we wanted to tie production issues in terms of errors or regressions in performance to the developers that actually pushed the code. So that not because that particular developer should get fired, of course. It's just more to just eliminate all of the wasted time in between the customer experiencing something bad in production and the developer team actually knowing about it. At the time, I was working at a large enterprise, and it was really crazy. It was like sometimes people would get a customer support ticket, and the customer support ticket would then forward it to the dev team or the product team, and then somebody would shout into a room like, who touched this part of the code? It's not working anymore.
Yeah. Line
And maybe that
27.
person,
Yeah.
and maybe that person was on vacation and nothing happened for weeks, right? I was just sitting there thinking, this, like, pre-deployment, we were all coordinating stuff on GitHub. Why was it so hard post-deployment to actually tie those ends together? So that's where I was coming from in terms of the UX angle or the collaboration angle.
Yeah, that UI where you could show the line of code where the performance regression had maybe been implemented, which commit did it, and all of that, I thought was a really cool innovation.
Yeah, thank you. I think so too. I think we did a poor job sort of going up market. We got hundreds of customers in the SMB space, but just as founders or as a company, we never matured past that. But that feature, like the Git integration, was really more valuable once you got into a larger organization, right? When you had so many teams and it was just so hard to figure out who had actually touched this particular code base that is now failing. But yeah, lesson learned, and now we're taking that to bucket.
Yeah. So Rasmus, I want to talk a lot more about Opbeat, but before we do that, where are you based?
I'm in Copenhagen.
You're in Copenhagen. So what's the tech community like in Copenhagen? Is it growing quickly? Is it kind of stagnating? How is it?
I would say it's doing quite well now. It's been a long time coming, right? In the Opbeat days when we were raising capital, like there were no angels at all in Northern Europe. We had to go to England and we had to go to the US. So we got a tiny check from an angel in Denmark, probably the only one who was doing angel checks in Copenhagen at that time. And we used that money to fly to the US, where we got a bunch of good angels.
Yeah.
So, but now it's very different because we've had a bunch of unicorn companies in Scandinavia over the past decade or so, and there's alumni that start their own businesses, and there's a particular vibe now that is pretty encouraging. And also Copenhagen is a place that a lot of people want to move to. So there's a lot of foreigners who actually work in tech companies in Copenhagen now. That part is working quite well too in terms of attracting talent to Copenhagen. Having said all that, in Bucket, we're only 7 at the moment, and we are all over. Like we are fully distributed because there isn't enough talent here for everyone. So it's still a problem, especially the commercial roles. It's much harder, at least for technical products.
So like go-to-market folks?
Yeah, at least for technical products. If it's consumer products, then it's probably okay. But for technical products, like product marketeers or customer success for very technical products, there's just so many more in the US, like many more. It's not the types of startups that get started over here as much.
Yeah. Well, I think to your point, like it's slowly changing, and maybe in a couple generations, it'll be not that big of a deal anymore. And I'm hoping that like you can start a startup anywhere and there's talent around, but also I love the remote aspect too, because you kind of get the best people from wherever they are. So which I think you like that as well, right? Like we work remotely together at Elastic. Like it's just kind of, it works well, I think, when you do it intentionally.
That's the key word, intentionally, right? I think that's what worked at Elastic, and some of the companies didn't really. They had like a headquarter and then had a bunch of satellites.
Yeah.
And that doesn't really work. But if it's truly distributed, then I thought Elastic was just a really, really interesting experience in terms of, I think there were 500 at Elastic when I joined, and it was just so smooth. And even when we saw each other in real life, like people were just there were just bonds there. It just worked really well.
Yeah, I agree.
Just curious, are you doing any seed investing yourself now and helping to grow that? And if so, can you talk about any of the companies you might have invested in?
Yeah, I've done a little bit. One was in a fantasy game for soccer or for football. So they were trying to do this mobile app where you could talk to communities within fantasy football. And I thought it was just a really, really interesting community to tap into because there's games every week, right? So essentially you just have retention on a weekly basis because you have to go in and update your team. And then after the games were played, you have to go in and, there's a bit of banter with all with the friends in those leagues. It didn't work out though. So for probably a number of reasons, startups are hard, but I thought that was an interesting angel investment to do. And I like the team. So I've been doing a little bit, but not as much as I would like to. I just haven't found the time, unfortunately.
Right on. So you're working at a company, you see a problem, you decide to build something to fix that problem. When did you decide to go out and start Opbeat?
Well, Opbeat was really born out of being in a large organization, as I mentioned, seeing just how slow the engineering and product organization was to sort of take in customer feedback, mainly received by customer support at that particular company. And it's just looking at it and thinking like pre-deployment, we're really structured in the way we work, right? We can have multiple branches of code and we can merge them together and it works like technically, and we deployed. That's a pretty big lift, right? And the tool chain and toolkit back then was just maturing a lot, but then post deployment was still a bit of a shit show. So I thought, okay, this surely should be better, right? The incumbents were there and they were great companies, but a new company should be built on Git first and foremost, built on the collaborative aspect. So yeah, just took a dive, I quit, and then, rest is history.
Yeah. So you started the company. When you started, like, how did you approach finding product market fit, or did you already know based on your use, like, this is going to be fairly easy to find product market fit? It's just a matter of convincing people to try it. Like, how did that work in the early days of the company?
I honestly wasn't too worried about product market fit in terms of organizations with a lot of engineers shipping a lot of new features. They will make bugs and problems for themselves. That's just the nature, right? And back then, move fast and break things was really like sort of the big motto in many organizations. Suck came up with it and people followed, and for good reasons too. We were just shipping a lot. DevOps became a thing. Ship often, but then fix these things quickly after. So I thought we were sort of, in terms of timing, we're like, it made sense. I think where we struggled and where we failed, and this is something that I learned the hard way at Opbeat, I think, is staying focused from idea to that first version of the product that is essentially your product market fit, and not taking too many D routes along the way, because it sounds like, oh, this feature could be nice to have as well, or this thing could be nice to do as well, and it sounds like a 1 week or 2 week thing, but it's not. It takes much longer.
It's never 1 or 2 weeks.
Exactly, and it's not only the engineering cost of it, it's also just how do we then package all this afterwards and sell it? Like, if we have all these features going all these directions, like, how do we then, what is this thing, right? So scoping of products or scoping of individual features, I'm really into that now, and I think I learned that the hard way back in Opbeat, because we took some decisions that basically cost 6 months of runway or just time to go to market, because we thought it would be much less, right, or much easier or less maintenance, but it's just very rarely the case. It's just very costly to say yes to those features. So to your question, I thought we had a good idea, and it seemed like something that resonated when we spoke to early prospects or design partners, but we took too long to get there because of the failures that I just mentioned. Also, a bunch of other failures. We had to learn to hire and to run a team and to manage a team, and we were just first-time founders, really, and there's a lot of firsts. But the product in particular, I wasn't too worried about in this particular case.
It's interesting you mentioned all these failures, because I don't know if a lot of people realize that, but in my experience, most startups are built on a lot of failures. Like, and you take the the experience to the next one. I think I read somewhere that like second time founders are usually much more successful, and I think that's exactly why, right? Is because you go through all those failures, you learn a lot, and you also, I think, gain some courage as well. Like your skin gets a little thicker. I don't know if that's true. What do you think?
I think that's a good way of putting it, actually, because I remember asking for feedback, and even though I think the potential customers we were sitting across from, they understood where we were going. Like, they understood the collaborative nature of an APM solution or post-deployment issues. They understood all of that. But then when we showed them the product that we had built up until that point, like the actual product, they were maybe more like, this is nice, but it's not quite it's not the vision you said made sense, but this is not it. If they say 2 nice things and 2 very bad things, if you don't have thick enough skin, you will put too much weight on the 2 good things, as opposed to just say, okay, they mentioned 2 things that are absolutely shit. We should just stress out, and we should be absolutely stressed about those 2 things and fix them, because those are the things that really matter, and those are the things that keep them from buying our product. But you also when you're a rookie, you also just get very encouraged by some big name person saying that two things were nice about your product and you're going in the right direction. You can come to the wrong conclusion that you're actually on track. But really what you should be asking, of course, is how far are you from replacing New Relic with this product, right? Or App Dynamics or whatever you were using today. And then you would be getting much more like hard,
Yes.
answers.
Yeah.
But you have to be ready to take it on the chin then, right? And be,
That's right.
thick skin. And you have to communicate it to the team as well, which I struggle a lot with. Like, it's not that I wasn't transparent, but I always thought that the team would really be depressed about hearing some big names saying bad things about the state of things.
Yeah.
So I didn't sugarcoat it, but it was just, I hated, forwarding that feedback. Whereas today we do it much more bluntly. And I've found that if you work with seasoned people, it can be invigorating. Like they can almost be like, you want to prove them wrong, we want to fix that, or you want to, you can get rallied up about addressing that particular point. So it's not bad, of course, but yeah, to your point, I think you need some thick skin to keep asking customers for feedback and keep getting told that no, we're not ready to replace you with what we have today.
Yep. Well, you made a bunch of great points there. I think one of the ones I wanted to highlight was this idea of asking better questions. So like instead of saying what's great, what's bad, it's like what would stop you from replacing New Relic with this solution? That is much more a stop and think type of question. And it's not so much that like they're going to say this part of your product sucks. It's like this is what would prevent me from using your product. So it's not as emotionally hurtful, I guess, if you're like that type of person. But I think that's a really good exercise to go through for founders, is like figure out the better questions to ask, because you're going to get much better answers. But be prepared for the response, for sure.
And also getting into the helicopter and thinking about positioning much more. I've seen this quite often from founders, like, what category are you in? Who are you replacing? Is there a budget to even purchase whatever you're selling, right? Or are you just selling this new gadget that is technically amazing but doesn't fit into an organization anywhere? Or maybe only to this tiny subset? So that positioning aspect is just so important, and it will drive your roadmap and how you go to market, and it will drive everything. So you need to go through that exercise. But yeah, we weren't good at that back then either. So we learned all this stuff the hard way.
Yeah, that's fair.
When you're designing the product, how much of an eye do you give to potential acquirers or natural acquirers of your product later? Are you thinking like, well, we want to design it in a way where it naturally integrates with Elastic, and maybe Elastic might buy us later or something like that? Or is that just not even a consideration?
I wouldn't say it's a consideration. I think I'm one of those that only can really work on something that I'm very, very passionate about. But if that's true, then I'm just like, there's an endless amount of energy but if I'm going somewhere where I'm not passionate about it, there's no energy. I'm just one of those types of people. So if I were just trying to get acquired, I think there were many other smarter places I could go. Having said that, I do like being in a category where there are incumbents that are 6, 8, 10 years old. So you have a few years to sort of get off the ground. And then once you are, then the next generation of whoever you're selling to might be ready for you, that next wave. And so Steve, you talked about AI just before, but constantly, like every 5, 10 years, some new trend is emerging. And it just means that all categories they will get disrupted within a decade, because they're just built off of new ways of working or new integrations that are possible now that weren't before, or mobile or whatever, right? So I do like that. I'm not gonna lie. I do like being in an area where that hasn't been too much innovation for quite some time, and the incumbents are becoming maybe post IPO and going up market, focusing on some other things. Yeah, I find that interesting in terms of positioning. But it's also hard because then you're fighting companies who have 8-10 years on their, and it's just good products, good companies. Like, so that's hard.
Yeah, I remember my early days at Elastic. I used to get into these kind of checkbox brigade wars with other companies, and they were trying to compare us with themselves and the other things that they were using. And part of me, there was always this thing in the back of my mind, like, are people really going to buy this because it's the new hot thing and it does these few things really well? I was like, well, let's see if that works. And sure enough, it did. But it can be scary going against a bunch of incumbents, wondering if you're good enough to compete with them.
I mean, one feature for one particular audience, like nail that and just close those customers in that niche and then see if you can broaden out later. And quite often you can broaden out later. But I think a lot of companies, especially startups, and maybe sometimes because of boards and VCs or fundraising, get into sort of, we need to conquer the world now. And therefore our tagline will be something that is very broad. And it will feel as if they're not ambitious enough if they only went for a very, very tiny niche that only has 100 customers or so. But I think that's not bad. Like, close them, learn the playbook, scale the team based off of your learnings, and then broaden out. I think that's actually a pretty viable idea, as long as you know that you can broaden out later, of course, right? But it's not unambitious to start small and just focus. I think focus is a big keyword in building a startup.
It's funny you said that. I was texting with my founder last night. Like, focus is my new word for the next few weeks. Like, it's just been ramping up in my mind. It's like, we need to focus more, because we're too scattered. But I feel it kind of coming together. So I totally agree with you. It's couldn't be more important.
Yeah, it's really undervalued. Sometimes if I only do one thing in a given week, but at the end of the week, that thing is really good, it's in a good place, every single day of that week, I'll think, I'm only doing this week. I don't feel very productive.
That's so true.
But then when a year has gone by and you look back and you did 52 things really well,
yeah,
the sum of that is just a lot. And it's much more than if you just did a little bit of here and a little bit of there every day. When you look back after a year, you didn't do anything really. But 52 weeks of focus is just very, very, very productive. And it feels like much more than it is once the time has passed.
Yeah.
Compared to when you're in it. So, but it's very hard to do in practice. It's easy to say on a podcast.
Well, yeah, that's so true. Like, I don't know about you, but my to-do list is pretty big. It's hard to say, I'm just going to pick that one thing and focus on it all week because I feel guilty the whole week.
I try to just have at least one thing I accomplish every day.
Yeah.
And, maybe it's not as big as what I could do in a week, but if I could break it down into days, and not even every day is great, but if I get, 3 out of 5 days, I got something really good done, like I consider that a success.
So Rasmus, you mentioned something earlier about pricing and making sure like you're competitive there. How do you approach pricing a product at the early stages of the company?
By dialing it up, I would say.
Okay.
You mean you make it more expensive and then you can always come down? Is that was me by dial it up?
Yeah, because when you ask for more money, you're also asking tougher questions, right? If you can get someone to... It's another way of asking the questions that we talked about before in terms of, do I have product market fit? Like, if someone is spending $100 on it, you can see it as success, but really the customer might just be thinking, this is a very cheap trial that is like $100 a month, but I'm not really committed to it. But if you ask them like 1,000 or, then it might be a little more serious in terms of the answers that you'll get back. And freemium and, product-led growth and consumerization of IT. And we've been through all these waves where we should make products that are just self-service, even for enterprises. And I do think that's the end goal for most products, but I don't think you should start there. I think you should end by having like a free tier, because that's basically a marketing go-to-market lead gen channel. But in the early days where you're fishing for product market fit, you don't want to waste too much time on the types of accounts that will sign up for something that is free and maybe just ask you to add a bunch of features that they will never really use because they're just toying around anyway, so.
Yeah, I noticed that your, not to jump too far ahead, but your current company Bucket does not have a free tier. I thought that was interesting. Yeah, we don't, we've talked about that later, but just to call that out, you're actually doing what you just said, which is cool.
Yeah, but the pricing on the page is actually also too cheap. So we're going to remove. We're talking about it right now, but we are going to dial it up, as I said.
That's totally fair. What do you think about the dollars in terms of value over time? Like, how do you find the right balance between, am I asking enough for this product versus or against the value it's going to provide the customer over 1 year, 3 years, 5 years, or a lifetime? Like, how do you consider that calculus when you're pricing something?
I think products should also always should feel a little bit like you're winning as a customer. You're purchasing a piece of software because that will make you more effective, but it will also cut cost. What is the thing that you're doing before buying this piece of software? Is it some manual work that is costing you X amount of hours every month and therefore is maybe worth 3K a year or 10K a year or 100K a year? And then you can price it to like a percentage of that, not one-to-one. So everybody is winning. I think that's the sweet spot. But what is it that you're replacing is what you want to find out, right? Are you actually removing a manual problem or even a problem, or just adding something nifty, but not really something that, like, if people didn't use you, would they just do nothing? Or would they do manual updates in a spreadsheet all the time? If they do the latter with the spreadsheets, then how many hours are you spending on it? And then you can sort of get to pricing. But again, it sounds, yeah. We didn't understand any of this when we were starting out. So we had a free tier, and we got a bunch of small SMBs who texted us all the time saying, why can't we do X, Y, and Z? And they would never pay for it because, yeah. So having a free tier is also, yeah, it's very noisy. So for some products, it probably makes sense early, but we decided not to initially.
Yeah. Well, it's also interesting because, like, when you're starting a company, depending on the space you're going after, a lot of times it's the SMBs that adopt it first because they're the most bleeding edge, like less risk averse than the bigger corporations. And also, I think the people that join startups are different than the people that join big companies longer term. I know this is a broad brushstroke, but just hear me out. Like, I think that the people that join startups are much more willing to take risks, and that also includes the products they use to get their job done. So, like, I'm much more likely to use something new myself than maybe one of my friends who's like, oh, I don't trust that yet, or I'll wait for everyone else to fail on it and they build something robust and then I'll adopt it. I think both are valid. Both are totally valid. But it can be a challenge to your point. It's like, where do you find that perfect kind of mix of people that are willing to take risks and have the money and the problem, but they're not SMB where they might not be around in a year?
No, it's a very good point. And it's just very hard to get off the ground in that case, right? Where you need to build that sort of credibility and maturity. I think companies are getting more and more funded. Oh, well, times have changed over the past 12 months, but you could, as a startup, go quite far in terms of maturity, in terms of team size and what you can achieve in a year or two based off of the seed round sizes that we've seen. So I think you can maybe try to eliminate some of those doubts faster these days. But you're right, it's hard gaining that credibility.
So let's talk about Bucket. How did you come up with the idea for Bucket? And then I'd love to hear, Chad and I were hoping you could kind of pitch us and give us the pitch so we can do a little back and forth there.
Yeah, sure. Well, we're empowering product teams to build features that customers love. That's what we're doing. Over the past 10 years or so, the tools that we use pre-deployment, as I mentioned earlier, have just matured a lot, right? We have GitHub, code reviews, CI, push to deploy, all these great things that make us able to, as product teams, deliver features technically that work very fast, very often. But then on our Kanban board in Jira, we drag them to done as soon as they're deployed. And technically they've been deployed successfully. That's great. But now the customers are seeing it for the first time. And this is the critical phase. Like, and our workflows stop at done in terms of deployment and not when the customers are satisfied. So we're shipping these features into a void, I find, of we don't really know if the customers like what they see, if this is what they asked for. Maybe they didn't ask for it at all, and now they're just confused. And it's kind of nuts that we are spending so much money delivering these features and then not following up in terms of, do they actually love it? I actually had one episode at Elastic that I can refer to in terms of, it was just one data point in terms of coming up with bucket. The actual feature escapes me, but we did something in Elastic Observability where we shipped a feature that we thought would be like a tick of a box that would help sales, because we were hearing that this feature was in high demand in demos, and we shipped it, and then we felt good about it. And then 9 months later, I think, through sales and primarily through sales, we heard that we've pitched this feature, customers have tried it, they came back and said they don't like it. It's a failure, basically. Like the feature is not good enough, and we can't compete with this competitor. And that took, I think, 6-9 months for that feedback to get back to the product teams. And in all that time, product teams and product marketing had thought like, we nailed it. We shipped this feature, and they were on to the next feature, the next backlog items, the next wish list items, right? And in all of this time, ideally, what they should have been working on was fixing that feature that was a failure. It's not that the idea was a failure. The execution just wasn't good enough. So you can easily lose 6-12 months by not paying attention. We just see that a lot. And as I said, I tried that firsthand. And we think there needs to be like an extension of the pre-deployment workflow where there's a final step post-deployment where we validate the feature with customers. And that's exactly what Bucket is. It's that final step.
Yeah, I'm noticing a trend in your companies now. You're really focused on the user experience, but a lot of it is like, are the things we're building actually useful? And it's like post-production stuff. It's like, you're not done when like you said, the Jira task is done. And I even notice on the website, you have that kind of Kanban board thing where it's like, to do, doing, deployed, evaluating, and then it's done after it's validated, which I really like.
Yeah. So would you call this, is this a market where there's incumbent players, or are you really defining a new category in this startup?
Good. That's a great question. And that gets me back to the positioning stuff that we talked about before, right? We don't see ourselves as product analytics. I think this would be the category that you would expect us to be in. Product analytics is Amplitude, Mixpanel. These companies been around for a long time. They do event tracking, and they show you monthly active users, retention rates, and so forth. And metrics is a big part of what we're doing. It is a big part of measuring a feature's success. In terms of Steve's question, in terms of how did I come up with the idea, product analytics as a category has been around for 10 years, as I said. And I think some of the products out there are really good in that category. But I've struggled getting my teams to use them on the product team level, on the feature level, not on the how do people get into the product level, like what is the onboarding funnel or the activation funnel, what is the monthly active users. That stuff is sort of covered for sure. That works very well. But when you ship a piece of the product, like an individual feature, that there is no concept of a feature in product analytics. It's really just up to teams to chart an event on a time series chart and then aggregate it somehow, and then remember to come back and check it versus some different segmentation, visualizations. And it's very manual. And I've for so long I've tried to get product teams to, you ship the feature, now go create a dashboard for it that you check repeatedly until you feel good about it. And it has never worked. And I keep talking to customers, and I've kept talking to customers for 10 years that also say the same thing. Now, there's definitely maybe 5% of the companies that I've talked to that does this well, and they nailed it. And a lot of them are probably in Silicon Valley. But even in Silicon Valley, but also just the rest of the world, you see so many product teams that don't have any eyeballs on these dashboards. They're not data-driven at all. And when you talk to the CPO or the CEO even, or the CTO, like the cost of R&D in modern companies is about 30%. Like you're spending 30% of your money on the product and engineers, on the PMs and the engineers and the designers. And they're the least data-driven in the entire organization. Like a marketing team doing some campaign and not knowing what the CAC is afterwards is like, what are you doing? Of course you know the CAC, but we don't even have an acronym for measuring the feature success in product. And we're spending so much money on these very highly skilled resources. So I think the category has been around for a long time, but I think it's as much a workflow issue as it is a data problem. Because I do think the data is there. It's just not aggregated, not shown, not put into a process and workflow in the right way that is adoptable for product teams at large.
Well, and Rasmus, you're really simplifying things too. Like these are complex things to look at and aggregate, and you have simplified it into they've never used it, they've tried it, they're using it, or they stopped using it. Like it's a really simple way to think about it and make the user experience much less complex. Like I think people would probably think, I don't even know how I would do that. And all of a sudden buckets can say, well, you already have the data. You just don't know how to put it all together, and we can help you do that. Is that fair to say?
Yeah. But it is hard selling metrics, I would say, because some
Yeah.
people do look at this and say, I can probably do that in my dashboard over here.
Yeah.
But some of these queries are like 100 lines of SQL, and they're like a bunch of aggregations on top of each other. And they're just very hard to do in products that are primarily focused on the entire box of the product, like monthly active users, conversion funnels, sign-up funnels, and so forth. It's not that it's impossible. It's just, it's a lot of work. And again, I think that's why those efforts just keep failing, because it's much harder than it looks. So what we tried to do with those KPIs was really to do like a turnkey baseline for any feature. And I would have loved to have that report for any feature shipped in the past 3 months in all the organizations that I worked in. Just the baseline metrics. Just tell me, like, did we nail adoption and engagement of these features, or are any of them absolutely just not seeing any adoption? And then we can have a conversation. Is that because of UI, UX, or is it because we didn't communicate the feature well enough? Is it a product marketing question? If the adoption is low, it's probably a product marketing question. If the churn is high, it meant that people actually tried it, but they just discarded it afterwards. Then it's much more a product problem. And now at least you can have a conversation, whereas before, all of this stuff was in spreadsheets that were manually updated until the PM then forgot about it. And some PMs just didn't do it at all. And also PMs come in many different shapes and sizes, and some of them are much more on the sales side of the organization. So it's also, it's implicitly on them to own product post-deployment, but it's also like they're doing 1,000 things. So it's also just a big ask, really. So we want to make a flow that is surfacing this data for everyone in the product team, like engineers, product, and designers. And Marty Kagan, who is this product guru out of Silicon Valley Product Group, he wrote a book called Empowered, which basically saying all what we're putting into a product. He's all about, like, from the top somewhere, there's probably a product strategy, and there are some problems that our users are facing that we should fix for them. But you give the teams, like the individual product teams, you give them those problems, and then they come up with solutions. And it's basically solutions ideas, right? Because features are those solutions, but features are really just bets. Like, we think this feature could fix this problem, but we don't know. You ship a feature, and then these teams should then be able to self-correct and self-iterate really fast, instead of waiting for someone to come from another part of the org to tell you that something isn't working. I don't think that's the way it's going to work in 2-5 years' time.
Yeah, that's fair. And I think on the front end, like we were talking earlier about how you wouldn't find out about a feature not being useful for 9 months. And it's just, there's this kind of natural lag in the sales orgs where people buy the product, implement the product, use the product, and then you go ask, how is it going? Now, a lot of companies, they built CSM teams, and the idea, I think part of that was to like help them through the process and find opportunities for upsell and cross-sell. But a lot of people never ask the questions like, are you actually getting value out of the stuff that you just started using? And I think part of the reason people don't ask that question is they don't want the answer, because they're afraid that the answer is going to be no. You know what I mean? So I just don't ask.
Yeah. The incentives are a little bit screwed sometimes as well, because you're not necessarily, as an engineer, getting paid to deliver impact. You are, to some extent, getting paid to ship features that work technically. I think all of this is changing, and product for sure is already getting measured on impact, but they are also getting measured on roadmap items ticked off in the last quarter, which is much more about how fast are we moving as opposed to how impactful are we. And I think that question is definitely changing, where individual feature items doesn't mean as much as actual impact, actual validation from customers saying, now I love this product even more. I'm definitely going to be retained in 3 years' time, right? I think that's much more what we're going to see more across all of R&D, not just product, but also designers and engineers.
Well, we've talked about that before with companies like Google or Facebook, who are really good at measuring the impact of certain features that developers have built, and their annual bonuses are based on, you know, the impact of the work that they've done and all of that, and it leads to these other sort of negative consequences, like nobody wants to work on bug fixes. You know, nobody wants to work on maintaining old software. They want to work on the new stuff where it'll help them get promoted in their promotion review packages and things like that. And yeah, that's kind of this double-edged sword with giving developers also access to this data. Not that they shouldn't have it, but how do you, as a company, ride that line where you do need people to maintain old software, and you don't want people just saying, well, I'm only going to work on the most impactful stuff because that's how I'm going to get paid, or that's how I'm going to get promoted, or whatever.
Yeah, but I think if you're getting told as an engineer to go work on some legacy code base and maintain it, I think you'll be much more motivated to do so if you can see in the metrics that are available to you that all of our legacy customers, they love this still, or they're still on this, and you're making their lives better. So just making that much more transparent, I think actually will help both ways in terms of, you know, passion and purpose of the work. We talk to many engineers, and engineers have actually signed up for Bucket quite a lot, which I really love. And it's because sometimes they're sitting at the end of the waterfall and they go like, I've been sitting here shipping features for a few years, but nobody ever told me if like it was actually impactful or not. And I think they're happy to work on any part of the code base as long as they know why and that they're making someone happy about it, even if it's some legacy boring thing. There are, of course, engineers, maybe more junior ones, who just love to work in the newest frameworks and whatnot, right? But I think more senior ones, they just want to move the needle and want to make something that matters. And CTOs and CPOs, of course, are always fighting for resources. And with Bucket, a CTO can go like, here's all the features that we're maintaining every month. It's costing us 15% of our resources. Like, that's just the baseline. So we only have this amount of people to build new features. What can we deprecate down in the maintenance line? And if all of the maintenance features, all of the legacy stuff is still used and loved by customers, then of course keep maintaining it. But if some of it is not used at all, then you can have that conversation and get rid of some of it and then free up engineering resources. So there should just be, we see Bucket as a love story between product and engineering. Like, you should have the same product, same platform, the same dashboard to make these decisions based off of, as opposed to having their own silos of data. And just a final point in terms of positioning. I said before that we don't see ourselves as product analytics. It's because we're also adding qualitative insights to the product so that you can actually get qualitative feedback from your customers. Because there could be customers who keep being retained on features, but they actually hate it. They're just waiting for an alternative to do X, Y, and Z better, and then they move, right? Or they're annoyed every month and they're so close to churning, but they keep using it because they have to do business, but they don't like it. So getting that qualitative feedback is so important as well. And that's not metrics driven. That's a dialogue with the customers. Having the metrics, engagement metrics on Bucket unlocks the possibility of saying, of all the ones who use this feature actively every day or every week, I want 50 of those in this enterprise segment to give me qualitative feedback on this feature. We can then proactively ask these people at the right time when they're engaging with the feature and they're just in the context of working with that feature, ask them, what do you feel like it? So having the qualitative data and the quantitative data in the same place unlocks a bunch of cool things. And that is new category territory, I find. It's not just product analytics, it's not qualitative insights, it's like combining it. And I think there are more verticals that we'll add to Bucket down the line that aren't just metrics driven to better answer these big questions that I was talking about before in terms of CTOs and CPOs coming together and having a better conversation about what's important, what's not, what's working, what isn't.
That's a great answer.
I would love to ask you more questions about that, but we don't have too much time left, and I want to get into kind of the founding of Bucket and a little bit of that backstory. So my first question is, Like when you first decided to start Bucket, what were some of the conscious things you did differently this time, because you now have done this before and you've had some, you got some battle scars. Like, what do you do differently this time in the early stages?
We raised our pre-seed round in November 21. So that's when Bucket became more than just me. So I raised that pre-seed round when it was just me, but I raised it based off of actual customers, because I hacked together a prototype for Bucket where I got, I think, a handful of customers or so. And it wasn't great, of course, the product, because I'm not an engineer and, but it was good enough to get 5 customers who were sizable in terms of, how big their R&D teams are, and they could see where I was coming from. And I asked them to pay, and they wanted to, right? And so that was a very different approach. Just like really quickly, just say, how much do you want to pay for this? Is this worth paying for? And one of those organizations, by the way, had a PM decide to do a Zapier integration, and it made sense. Like there was a good brief. I think everybody sort of liked the idea. I wasn't in the details, but it seemed like everybody was in line, and they built that Zapier integration. It took 6 months. It was a big enterprise organization, so developing features is just costly and take a lot of time. In the logs after 6 months, they found, the engineers that is, found that only 10 unique customers had ever used this stuff.
Oh,
and
wow.
And there was a huge maintenance cost every week on making sure that all the SAPs were working.
Okay.
And the engineers were looking at the log lines because they couldn't actually understand why it wasn't broken at all during this time. They thought it would break because of all the usage and all the SAPs and all the integrations.
Yeah.
But it didn't break, so they wanted to check if the logging was correct, I think. And they found out that very few customers were using it. And then they found Bucket, and then you were like, we're not going to do this again.
Yeah.
We're going to ship features, and that's cool, but we're going to check if they actually use them or not, because we're not going to maintain all these things that, and that came from engineering, which I found was very interesting.
Yeah, I love that. So you found some really good early adopters, sounds like. You raised the initial funds, and then you raised again. Where are you at now in the stage of the company? Are you raising again?
No. Now we raised the seed round, and now we're growing the team past the initial product engineering team, right? That is focusing on getting the first customers, which we did, of course, and then getting to product market fit. Now we're hiring for the more commercial roles, which is exciting, and which is something I'd love to talk to you guys about off mic, because
yeah, for sure.
Finding AEs and customer success people, maybe even head of sales so early is an interesting challenge, because there's no playbook.
That's right.
So we need to find people who are willing to just go out and learn and hustle and do all the things that founders typically do. And that's a very different type of a rep, of course, than someone who just follows a playbook, but does that really nicely, right? So I'm getting into all of that. And before I was talking about having battle scars in product and engineering, and now I'm a rookie going into this world, and I'm probably going to get a bunch of battle scars doing that as well.
Yeah.
Can you talk about the details of your seed round? And also, is it still open? Is it too late for us to wet our beaks?
Chad has to ask.
I'm sorry, it's closed. It was a preemptive round by Project A, who's a Germany-based fund, but we're working with the UK office. But they've been following us for 12, 15 months, I think. And
how much did you raise?
We raised 3.5 in total, with including investors. We still had almost $1 million USD in the bank in terms of runway, so we weren't fundraising at all. But they leaned in and asked, like, what about doing it now? Like, it seems like you have customers, and maybe now is the time to mature up. And it was before I had initially thought about fundraising, but I had just had calls when the CEO was asking me, like, are you around in a year? We like the product, but are you around in the year? And and when you start to have those types of conversations, you want to raise, of course. You want to mature up, and you want to scale the team on all the functions that are outside of just product.
Yeah, show your customers and potential customers that you will be here 3 years from now for sure. You have the money.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And we talked about this earlier, and gaining that credibility is just hard work, and you need a team to do it.
In terms of battle scars and lessons learned, I mean, was there anything like in Opbeat where you would say, well, we took on these early investors that didn't help us that much, and maybe you looked at potential investors in different ways this time?
For sure. Very much so. I mentioned that Project A has been following us for quite some time, and our guy there, Jack, shout out to him. He was checking in with me like since the pre-seed round every quarter or so. I think initially he just had his CRM to remind him to check in with Rasmus. He probably did this with a bunch of companies, but what was different with him than others was that when we had a conversation, he followed up and sort of went like, I really like where you're going, but I think it could be even better if you just tweak this or tweak that, or gave me input on X, Y, and Z. And throughout those conversations every quarter, Bucket became a better company based off his feedback, because he was thinking a lot about what we were doing, and he was actually doing the work as if he was already a board member or part of the team. So when the time came to sort of pick an investor, of course, like he was just the perfect candidate. He had already shown that he knew exactly what we were doing, why we were doing it, and he had even made us better just by brainstorming with me and working with me. So if we can find some of those, then there's a big difference. There's a very big difference, especially when you're at the seed stage. Like, find someone who will roll up their sleeves. I think it's much more important than getting some big name fund or a partner to join your team, because they might not have time. They might be very, very smart, but they just won't have the time to focus on you at this stage.
Well, and also because you have a successful track record of starting and exiting successfully, it probably money's easier to come by, and actually that expertise and willingness to be hands-on is actually more important. Harder to find.
Yeah, it's definitely easier, but well, the markets have shifted a little bit, which is probably for the better, because it was getting a bit silly, at least from where I was watching. So now it's a bit harder, and we're back to it's back to being the table of turn, basically, right? So
due diligence is a thing again.
Exactly. Yeah.
So when you look at the world of investors, and like Chad mentioned, you have a bit of a track record now, so it's probably a little easier for you than others. But what criteria do you kind of think about, other than what you just mentioned about people that are willing to invest early and get their hands dirty? Because you could have picked probably from a lot of different investors. So why go with the one that you went with?
Yeah, I think reference calls is something you start to do when you're a little bit seasoned, when you just talk to other founders who have worked with these people before, and you're just like, are they there in good and bad times? Because there will be bad times. Are they good people, pragmatic, will pick the best argument over some ego? I think there are many, many very, very good VCs out there. So I'm not saying that's a general problem, but just make sure that you find the right ones, and that will basically be your support. I do think it's easy to underestimate that VCs invest in maybe a dozen companies a year, but over time that accumulates, and each partner in each firm has a lot of companies to sort of, just one of them needs to win and go big, right? But as a founder, this is your life, so you need someone who will also roll up their sleeves for you individually, and for that, and for that, I've found, for that to happen, or for the chances to be best of that happening, it has to be someone who's passionate about the product and the category you're in, because that just makes them implicitly interested in what you're doing. Well, not implicitly, but just by way of interest, and that works.
Rasmus, I'm curious, in the data that you've seen people collect with your product, are there anything that stands out in terms of, well, features that we've seen that don't work, or customers don't love these features? Why don't customers love these features? Or the features that customers do love, what is it about them that they love about it? Can you draw any generalizations in that space where you can start to advise your customers, like, your stuff is failing, we can show you that, but also we can tell you why it's failing?
We haven't gotten this far yet. I would love to get there, but that's definitely why we're adding the qualitative insights to the platform, right? And just going beyond just the metrics is to answer that exact question.
What about any sort of deeper analytics, like taking things one level deeper? Like, we've seen features where customers in the United States love these features, but customers in Europe don't. And
for sure,
something like that.
Yeah, and you could do that with Bucket today, but of course it's something that we can do even better and proactively tell you about, right? But then I think there's also other parts of this that are interesting. Like, some segments are liking this group of features, and others are liking another group of features. And that is sometimes connected to how they signed up or why they signed up or what campaign that sort of triggered them to get on the product, or when they got on the product, because products have an evolution, right? It's very important to understand that not everybody on your product is there for the same reason, and that we can definitely help uncover for the product teams.
So I want to talk about AI a little bit, just because it's, you know, all the hotness right now. So Rasmus, are you and the engineering teams looking at all this new innovation in AI that's happening rapidly and like trying to incorporate that into your processes, or how are you thinking about that right now?
The honest answer is that I'm not paying too much attention to it in terms of bucket, but I probably should, right? It's one of those where this technology is absolutely, definitely changing the way we interact with machines going forward. And I think for metrics-driven businesses, the way you query and visualize data could be like the UI of that is just very, very different, right? It's a text input as opposed to all these aggregation drop downs or whatever.
Yeah, I'm seeing more analytics tools that are, you know, showing dashboards and results of queries just from natural language.
Exactly. And I think, yeah, exactly. So I think that the UI is definitely going to change. There's a few companies that do this well already. And I think traditional product analytics or just metrics, BI tools basically are going to change significantly.
Well, and part of the reason I'm asking you is not only just because you're, you know, building a new company and this is all happening around us, but also because of your focus and your background on the user experience. Like, I think if you did use a lot of these things that we were talking about lately, you'd be very frustrated. You'd be like, well, this sucks, and this is why it sucks, and that sucks, and that's why it sucks. So
yeah. Automation is a very, very big part of what we're doing. One thing is the different data parts that I mentioned earlier, but also just delivering this in a repeatable framework to the customers is something that I think is very, very important.
Yep.
And I think to some extent you can go by quite well with less data, but in a repeatable way. And so automation is a very, very big part of what we're doing. And I'm just saying that in terms of we are very focused on surfacing the data to the users without them having to do anything. Of course, when they have follow-up questions and stuff like that, AI could potentially be very powerful for us, but we are trying to make this almost like automated evaluation for any feature.
I love it. Well, Rasmus, maybe in the future, if we talk again about on the podcast, at least, maybe we'll have some different conversations about the use of AI in the product and how developers are thinking about it. Because that's one of the topics we don't have time to get into is like how developers are using this to augment their abilities and like deliver things faster, which I think is really fascinating.
Yeah, it would be awesome to have you on in another 18, 24 months and see how your product has evolved.
Yeah, for sure. Let's do it.
Let's do it. Let's put it on the calendar. All right, everybody. Rasmus, thanks for joining. We've had a nice little run of product management episodes here. We had Alex on from Zata, who runs product management. Will, who's product manager at HighSpot. We had another founder on in the most recent episode showing us a demo. You're here building a product for product managers. This has been a great episode, and I want to thank you for coming today, even though I am personally suffering from dry beak syndrome. You know, congratulations on the recent fundraising round, and I think you're building something great here. Thanks for coming.
Yeah.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah. And if you are listening to this and you go to Bucket and you sign up, use the code software in blue and you won't get a discount. We won't get anything, but it'll put a big smile on our faces. And there's no place to put a code in, by the way, but it's bucket.co if you want to look at it.
And Rasmus, are you hiring anybody right now? What are you hiring for?
For sure. Yeah. AEs, product marketing, customer success, always product and engineering. But yeah.
And it's fully remote anywhere in the world.
Yep. Well, almost. There are some time zones that just don't work for us yet, but almost everywhere.
Well, America and Europe, okay.
Yeah.
Especially US East for now. Yeah.
Okay.
That's fair.
All right. Thanks everybody for listening, and we'll see you on the next episode.